So this is my second ever Patreon requested video, courtesy of patron Kira Charon, and is in fact a topic I've been meaning to cover for a little while now. It's just unfortunate it took this long, but hey, better late than never. Boku no Hero Academia, known in English as My Hero Academia, is a show that probably doesn't need an introduction at this point, but I'm certainly going to give it one for the one or two poor souls who have not been graced with its holy presence, or have ignored it because it's too mainstream. It's a shonen action comedy adventure series based in an alternate universe where almost all of humanity has developed special powers of some sort, all of which ranging from the fantastic to the underwhelmingly mundane. The series follows protagonist Midoriya Izuku, nicknamed Deku, as he traverses this world populated by heroes and villains and tries to attain his dream of becoming the greatest hero of all time. It starts with Midoriya being unable to follow his dreams due to being one of the 20% of the population who can't develop powers, or quirks, only for a lucky stroke of fate to put him on the fast track to true heroism. Along the way, he begins to gather a strong group of friends and allies as well as a currently small but steadily growing rogues gallery. At the time of this video, the series has had 2 seasons, both of which were absolutely fantastic and delivered individual conclusions that felt satisfying, but also wanting for just a little bit more, making sure it earned that 3rd season confirmation. The show has been a major financial success as far as I'm aware, and it's been critically lauded in every hemisphere of the planet. And I have to admit, the show was fantastic at catapulting itself into a favorite anime slot for me, and I certainly think the praise is well deserved. It's artfully animated, the comedy is spot on, the characters are engrossing, the plot is intriguing, and the emotional pitches come at just about all the right moments. From a critical angle, this show seems to be borderline perfect. But this is where I incur the wrath of the internet and say, it's not. It's not perfect, and believe me, saying that hurts me just as much as it might hurt some of you superfans. I want to put on the record here why I'm making this video and to clarify as to the commission's guidelines from Kira Charon. He asked me simply to do a video on My Hero Academia. Outside of that, he gave me carte blanche on what the actual subject matter would actually be. So I decided to take this chance to do what I don't really see too many other people doing and use my little soapbox to criticize the number of issues I have with the series that need to be carefully addressed going forward. No show is above criticism, and I'm going to voice my concerns if it means there's a chance someone on the creative team will hear and improve the show, even if it's in just an incremental way. So here we go, in no particular order, my top 5 issues with Boku no Hero Academia. More like Boku not so Hero Academia. Okay, I'm not even going to try to bother making that pun. First and foremost is the iconic character of All Might, who serves a vital role in the series both as a deuter antagonist and as a mentor figure for the main protagonist Deku. He's the world's greatest hero based purely on his efficacy, and early on in the series we learn that he was injured sometime before the show began. As a consequence, this injury is slowly and steadily squeezing the life out of him each time he uses his powers, giving him a hard time limit as to how long he can keep himself going before reverting to a completely useless state. Now, this is a fantastic plot point, and really gets used rather well throughout the show to ramp up the tension in those dire moments. A compounding factor is that by gifting his powers to Deku early in the show, his powers seem to be steadily leaving his body, meaning his time as a hero and maybe even his time alive is cut even shorter. It's used amazingly well, but I do have to raise a point of concern with how quickly the window of All Might's power is dwindling. When we're introduced to All Might proper, not just see him in Deku's favorite YouTube videos, he has about 3 hours of power to spend before becoming weakened, and by the end of the current run, that's been cut down to around or even under an hour. At this rate, it's more or less pushing the plausibility that All Might could function as a teacher in any capacity at UA, especially considering average class lengths, and let alone functioning as a hero independently. This is probably as good a time to mention that I've not read a lick of the manga, so there's more than likely some kind of endgame plan that I don't know about with his powers. The show is rather well written, and there's really no end in sight, so I just wanted to lodge this complaint as early as possible if it turns out to be a hurdle the writers can't handle. If the writer wants to keep All Might as a deuter antagonist, his time limit needs to go up somehow, if only in a temporary way to keep him in the fray. That said, the show has given me no reason to doubt this will be handled well, so it remains my most minor of concerns, hence why I'm getting it out of the way now. Now this next complaint is a little less forgivable, and instead of something that can be really tweaked or tuned going forward, this is a bell that's been rung, and boy did it fall flat. In Season 2, the rivalry between Deku and his classmate Todoroki is introduced, then put front and center, even going so far as to usurp the rivalry between Deku and his longtime frenemy, Bakugo. The two are diametrically opposed for a number of reasons. Raw talent versus earned skill, indignant reservation versus desperate recklessness, living in your predecessor's shadow versus striving to overcome it, There's dozens of facets integral to this showdown, but one of the most interesting parallels that caught my eye was how important their mothers were in shaping the two as characters. Deku's relationship with his mother is strained, not because of any kind of action either he or she took necessarily, but because she as his mother can't give him the one thing he wants, the ability to be a hero. This is actually kind of comparable to the modern day where children are born with birth defects and the parents feel guilty over it, either because their genes put their child at such a disadvantage in the world or because they didn't have the will to end the pregnancy to prevent future suffering on the part of their kid. Now it's important to note that I use the words comparable and not equivalent. These two situations are only similar when it comes to the guilt, not necessarily the severity of the problem. When the chips are down, the problems suffered by children with genetic disorders and their families trump those suffered by perfectly normal kids not born with superpowers. But in a world populated by almost entirely superpowered individuals, it could theoretically feel almost like the same situation to a parent of a powerless child. It's the emotion that's the same, not the severity, is what I'm trying to get at. It's this guilt and concern that ultimately makes Deku's relationship with his mom so compelling and contributes to what is probably one of the most heart-wrenching early scenes in an anime to date. Contrasting this is Todoroki's mother, who has an almost opposite feeling to Deku's mom. His home situation is rather complicated considering that his father only married his mother in order to produce a perfect successor, a child that can harness two incredibly powerful quirks that play almost effortlessly off each other. However, because of the forced nature of this espousal, Todoroki's mother begins to not only hate his father, but also begin to hate the elements of his father that she saw in him, in particular his left eye. This spite finally boils over when she's breaking down on the phone with her mother. When the young Todoroki overhears, well, she doesn't take it well. After becoming Zuko 2.0, he vows to never use the side of himself that his mother abhorred, and find a way to become better than his father without using his father's quirk. Meanwhile, his mother is wheeled to a mental hospital where he never takes up the initiative to see her again. The mirroring of a mother who loves and feels guilty versus one who is used and feels enraged is more poetic than I can accurately put to words, and the way that these scenes are absolutely integral to both Deku and Todoroki's characters is completely unavoidable. So, how do they resolve these tensions? They don't? Todoroki's resolution with his mother is at the bare minimum acceptable, ranging on too quick and too light. After the events of the tournament arc where Deku manages to knock Todoroki's head on straight and onto his own track of heroism, we're left with a hanging shot of him finally, for the first time in years, going to visit his mother. We're not showing the conversation, and we barely get a glimpse as to what was discussed between the two later in the season, but at the very least, the cutaway from the conversation could be argued to be artistic in choice, and it was done at the very end of an episode, so it could be argued quite strongly. Deku, on the other hand, there's no getting around it. When Deku finally gets his powers from All Might, we're never shown the conversation where he reveals that he has a quirk to his mother. Not until Season 2, where the prime opportunity to do so has already come and gone. Still, they could have made up for it by having a dramatic and touching scene, and even integrating a little levity in there to keep it from being a complete tearfest. Nope, it's just offhandedly mentioned somewhere in the middle of Season 2, and it's primarily just a gag poking fun at his mom's tendency to fret and worry over every little detail. I don't know how this played out in the manga, and honestly, I don't care at this point, because this is where the anime itself lost so many points for me. Him emotionally breaking in his computer chair while she held him and bawled into his shoulder is one of the most iconic scenes of the show. It's one of the most iconic images of grief in anime at this point, and it's never given a proper emotional counterweight. For a show that I consider one of the most perfect emotional balancing acts of all time, this is the biggest blemish it could possibly have, and it pisses me off to no end. Maybe it'll do more with it. Maybe that quiet moment I'm looking for is coming sometime in the future, and I just don't see it. But it doesn't matter, because just like jokes, when it comes down to emotions, timing and delivery are key. They chose to play a joke, not play an emotion, and I think that's what really put the nail in the coffin for me on the issue. They really should have handled Deku's mother a lot better than they did. Now here's an opinion that's sure to get me skewered. The music of the show kind of fails to impress me, mainly trailing back to the keystone theme of the show, You Say Run, and its successor, Jet Set Run from Season 2. I want to say here and now that I don't hate the soundtrack by any means, and even those two songs in particular. For the most part, every song serves its purpose admirably and hits the important emotional pitches that they need to be reached. But in particular, You Say Run, et al., has a strength that also serves as its most crippling weakness. It doesn't end. Now this is an exaggeration, of course. All songs by definition of their physical universe have to have an end at some point, but what I mean is that the song was never intended to end. This is one of those songs where you can easily loop it for 10 hours straight and never feel bad about having to listen to the whole thing because the way it's designed intrinsically allows it to carry all of its energy forward constantly. I'm not entirely sure how to put that in the technical terms, but if I were to compare it to Aristotelian plot structure, the entire song feels like a continuous rising action. Always working to keep the blood pumping through your veins. But therein lies the problem. It's all build, and it actually took me a minute to find a version of the song that has the conclusion completely intact. And I have to say, it's completely underwhelming. It's akin to having a high-pressure water hose with the flattest, whitest shower nozzle on the end, which ends up distributing the pressure so evenly it becomes a gentle shower. This is fine if you're trying to water an obnoxiously loud field of petunias, but not when you're trying to scrape the most recent sacrificial bloodstains off your garage floor. And considering this is a high-octane action show, you tell me which is a better option. And this is of course not to say My Hero Academia is the only series with this problem. As much as I love the Avengers, their theme song really needs some work, because the climax of that song is almost painfully meh. To be devil's advocate on my own point, however, the music is only a fraction of a scene's composition and even a fraction of the sound design. My Hero Academia is very quick to make up for the lack of musical kick by usually providing a powerhouse of visuals, acting, and pacing that quickly obscures the less than impressive conclusion to the center point songs. All those other elements carry the show, and that's fine, but I think if you want to wring the maximum amount of emotional value out of the series' hallmark action set pieces, the composer should really work on nailing the conclusion of whatever version of Yusei Run he's implementing in Season 3. If he can bring a satisfying end to this chain of songs, then it'll amplify the emotional output of the show tenfold, and for a show that's already emotionally charged, that's insane. Here are some good places for them to look for inspiration. Halo, whose theme ends with a callback to its beginning and serves as a nice lengthy falling action for the listener to slide down on. Until My Body is Dry from Kill la Kill, which is a shallower cooldown than Halo, but matches it with an abrupt end on a strong chord that leaves the listener bustling with energy built up during the song's body. And Joseph's Speed Battle from Ryan Nicky, which sticks with one primary melody that plays twice, separated by one main bridge, before having a conclusive and definitive end that builds off the main melody. The latter is probably the closest to Yusei Run in both intent and composition, and it's probably the best place to look for inspiration, since I think the key problem with Yusei Run is a reliance on 3 different melodies that dilute which one is supposed to be the main melody, and thus fails to key in the listener that we've reached the ultimate denouement. Of course, changing that would possibly damage the song's ability to be looped ad nauseum, so I imagine there's a difficult balancing act to be had there. Now the fourth issue is one that I don't think the anime itself is necessarily at fault for. Adapting an existing property between mediums has actually been a major focus of my study in the field of film and gaming, and I can tell you one of the most difficult things to translate is a sense of pacing. This especially applies between film and novels, but the same can be said of anime and their originating manga. You see, inherently, each person reads at their own pace. One person might take their time reading a book, soaking it up over the course of several days, if not weeks, and others might read a 150-page manuscript over the course of 2 hours. Yes, Ryan, I'm talking about you. Your eyes are an abomination to physics and need to be sacrificed to the elder gods to prevent the invasion of Earth. Because of this, written media often has a lot of slack lent to them in regards to pacing, where novels and manga can often have much slower, more exposition-heavy starts that build atmosphere and character while leaving plot on the back burner. Likewise, events that need to be detailed over the course of 4 or 5 pages can be easily viewed in the course of seconds when finally given visual dimension. While the gap and difference between these two disparate points is lessened between anime and manga, thanks to manga's inherently visual dimension, this doesn't entirely remove the problem. In fact, due to the motion and audio aspects provided by the anime format, there are still significant details that can be more quickly visualized and elaborated on. This causes problems between the anime and the manga when it comes to production speed, which is an issue that creates boom-bust cycles for certain series, but it also means that pacing is incredibly hard to balance as well. Luckily, the pacing distortions that My Hero Academia suffers are relatively minimal, and I think they're probably as well handled as they could have been without changing key aspects of the story, but like I said, I feel that lodging the criticism is important for people producing future works of similar nature. The main point of concern comes with the lengths of each arc of the story in relation to the overarching storylines of each season. Season 1 was probably the most consistent with its arcs, having around 5 distinguishable arcs to bounce from. The catalyzing episodes, the first train arc, the entrance exams, normal school life, and the confrontation with the League of Villains. Now the first 3 arcs, starting from the show's catalyst all the way through the entrance exams, all serve as a blanket introduction for the show and roughly as the first third of the plot. The second arc is primarily a rising action, and the third has a clear climax and falling action before concluding on a great, optimistic note. All 3 were roughly the same length and provided a good spread of balance between characters and plot, especially since it primarily employed Deku's personal story as the plot for the majority. Season 2, however, didn't get balanced so finely. There are 4 primary arcs this time around, yet all of them are very clearly their own and serve their own internal stories versus a centralized plot. The tournament is clearly centered around Todoroki, the mentor arc hones in on Ida, the finals arc is mostly about Deku and Bakugo, and the last arc, which is a single episode, is primarily used to officially bring Deku into the overarching plot of the series rather seamlessly. The lengths of these arcs are all over the place, with the tournament arc being a 12-episode ordeal, the mentor arc being 7, the finals arc being 5, and the redirection arc being on its own as a standalone episode. As a consequence, Season 2 has no through line to follow, and while I applaud it for ending on such a distressing note to herald in the eventual Season 3, it doesn't make the conclusion anywhere near as satisfying as Season 1. To remind you, Season 1 followed Deku as he went from having no powers and an unshakable dream to having the best power and successfully aiding and stopping a massive villain onslaught, just like one of the heroes he aspires to be. Season 2 starts with him in a tournament, jumps to him getting a better grip on his powers, helping his friends through a lot of personal issues, and then he gets mugged by a guy with a really uncomfortable affectation for hands. The pacing of these arcs probably works infinitely better in the manga, what with the different reading speeds and consistent flow of content. I haven't personally read it, and while I might in the future, any knowledge of it shouldn't affect my understanding of the show itself. It has to stand on its own merits, and the fact of the matter is, for as much as I love each individual arc of Season 2 as a whole was far less cohesive as a singular unit, and feels more like an in-between than a standalone amalgamation of episodes. My final contention lies with how damage is handled in the show, and believe me when I say this is a soapbox I've been waiting years to stand on. The human body can't take that much trauma and live! Yes, this is an animated show. Yes, these characters are fictional. Yes, these are fantastic powers well beyond our current scientific understanding. That does not excuse blatant contradiction of human biology, and it's an issue I've had with just about every anime on the planet that even had the slightest bit of grounding in reality. Hell, not just anime, movies and TV shows abuse this with abandon. It's called the Maid of Iron trope on TV tropes, though it could easily be any of the dozen related tropes as well. There's a depressing amount of intermingling going on here. And I hate it with an abandon. And you know what the sad part is? My Hero Academia is one of the better ones because the abuse of this trope isn't quite as prevalent. Still, it's there and I can't just ignore it. Deku, Todoroki, Bakugo, All Might, Endeavor, and dozens of other characters in this show throw around lethal powers with almost absolutely no consequence to anyone's safety. The only time it's really brought up is when Deku instinctively locked up just enough to prevent turning a villain into paste, when he was still getting a firm grip on his powers and they ended up breaking his limbs when he was getting used to them, and when 13 needed to turn off her powers to prevent anyone from straight up dying in her black hole. Other than that, characters are ragdolled around without issue and end up getting the dreaded anime scratches. This is most prevalent in the fight between Bakugo and Ochako. Ochako gets hit multiple times by Bakugo's explosions, the same blast we've seen clear chunks of asphalt and concrete through sheer concussive force, and yet the most extreme injuries we see visibly from Ochako is her body eventually giving out from prolonged strain. If this functioned in any level of our reality, half of Ochako's hair would have been singed off in the first bout of explosions and she'd probably have been knocked out cold. Ochako's powers grant her levitation of touched objects. Nothing more, nothing less, so how in God's name is she able to withstand explosions like that constantly? You can't exactly train for that at the gym. But this is where I double back and say that the show is actually pretty good about restraining itself in this matter, which mitigates some of my frustration with this point. Not completely, but I can't yell at it about this and not be fair to it. At the very least, the show does what it can to set up scenarios to prevent major character death every single time one of these walking nukes sneeze, which is going above and beyond the effort that some shows are willing to put in for that kind of forethought. The Ochiko vs. Bakugo fight is arguably the most easy example to point to in this entire series, the next being Hero Killer Stain, which has the argument of, well, this bastard is crazy already, of course he's going to fight through the pain of having several ribs dusted. And those are the most extreme examples present. Considering the current 38 episode run, that's an incredible amount of restraint to see. You might be asking, if it's such a non-issue, why bring it up? I'm pointing this out with some concern that a show that focuses as much as it does on collateral damage and unintentional injury better know what it's doing, or else we as an audience could lose the bite of those consequences. If we start seeing characters regularly walking out of impossible situations with only a few minor scratches, our suspension of disbelief in not only the action of the show but the entire premise is going to drop. This is me saying, be careful, My Hero Academia, you've got something good going, don't screw it up. And with that, I think I can safely call it wraps on my thoughts about the flaws present in My Hero Academia. Overall, they're actually pretty small and do very little to genuinely take away from the show, but if left unchecked, I think they could wind up being landmines that damage the quality of the show in painful ways going forward. Except for that whole mother's mess. That's already one major needle in the side of things. I'm begging for there not to be any more. I want to thank you all for sticking with me through this, even if you might disagree with me on some, if not all of the issues I've presented here. I love My Hero Academia. It's a show that has reinvigorated a small part of my heart that I haven't quite felt since my childhood, which is a beautiful thing to feel. This last year of anime titles has been absolutely stupendous, from My Hero Academia to Tanya the Evil to Dragon Maid to Princess Principal to Maiden Abyss. The quality of writing in the medium has never seemed to be as high as it is now, at least across the board. By making videos like this, I hope to keep it that way, to provide writers and artists a resource of criticism they can look back on to avoid making certain mistakes, or to even play off of them. And of course, videos like this wouldn't be here without you as my audience, supporters and detractors alike. So thank you, sincerely. A special shout out to my Patreon supporters for helping me produce these videos, and an especially big shout out to Kira Charon for commissioning this video in specific. I hope you have all enjoyed yourself with this video and found something of value with what I have to say. If you did enjoy this video and you want more content like it, please like and subscribe and keep an eye out for our next big production. That's all for now, and as always, catch you on the flip side.